Well, today we're going to continue on with what I introduced yesterday. Yesterday we talked about the story of the Bible. And as with every good story, the story of the Bible contains many of the same elements of the story. It has characters, it has a setting, it has a plot, it has a conflict, it has a resolution, and the Bible presents all of these together throughout the course of the story. And as we examined this story, we recognized that there were story beats that were occurring throughout the story. Those moments in the story when the plot is pushed forward in a dramatic way, whether it's through some great loss or some great win or victory. And throughout the course of the Bible, we find both of these represented. We find great losses through exile, through slavery, through the death of Yeshua, which seemed like a loss in the beginning. But we also find great victories. And when we encounter those great victories, we see that it's always God who is bringing about the victory. He is the one that's progressing the story in a positive manner. He is the one that is solely focused on bringing about the resolution to the conflict that man introduced into his temple. It was us who fell. It was us who tried to make ourselves in his place, to put ourselves as the one who was in charge of everything. And as we open the story, we recognize that Genesis 1 did set us up with a couple of ideas, a couple main ideas that are explored throughout the rest of the Bible. Some things that were broken at the fall. And every culture has a belief system in their story. And their story tells them about these aspects of what they believe humanity was made for. The source. What is the source of creation? What is the source of the world, of man? In Egyptian mythology, it was a bunch of gods came together off of an island in the middle of the wide ocean. And they got into a war, and in the aftermath of the war, one of the gods wept, and those tears formed into mankind, and that is the origin story of humanity. And in that story, mankind was born in grief and despair with no purpose. And so for Egyptians in their mythology, their purpose, their function, was to try to prove themselves to the gods, to make themselves something. And so they built great structures and they entered into worship practices in order to prove to the gods that they were worth something, that they meant something, that they could become something even though their origin was nothing. In Babylonian mythology, it was the gods again having a giant war, Tiamat being the bad guy, the chaos dragon, the other gods defeating this chaos dragon, eventually taking his body, creating land out of it, and then forming man from this land to be their servants. So in Babylonian mythology, mankind's purpose and function was to serve the gods as slaves. So the gods didn't have to provide for themselves anything. They could just ask man to do it. And if man didn't do it, judgment, destroy, you're being bad, serve us, provide for us. We want to live in leisure eternally. We can even look at modern atheism. Where does modern materialism say that mankind came from? A big bang. Another sort of accident. But this time not an accident as an aftermath of grief, just coincidence. It just happened to happen that mankind arose from the primordial goo. And now we're here. What do we do with ourselves? Well, no one can answer that. Not in the materialist viewpoint. There is no purpose other than to maybe pursue pleasure and even then, as we've talked in Ecclesiastes, people will recognize that pursuit of pleasure is empty. It's void eventually. The end result of atheism is nihilism. Just nothing has meaning. Nothing has purpose. Because we came forth from nothing, and nothing is all that there is. The purpose of mankind and of creation in atheism is nothing. There is no purpose. There is no meaning. And so we just do what we want. YOLO. You only live once. Let us eat, drink, and party, for tomorrow we may die. Well, Genesis 1 gives us instead God's purpose, his function. And as we talked yesterday, Genesis very clearly makes the point that Adonai, Yod-Heh Vav-Heh, is the source of all things. And when he brought us forth, he didn't do so as an accident. He didn't do so to make us slaves. He brought us forth with his own hand. The rest of creation he spoke into being, but humanity he formed intimately with his own hand. He brought us into his garden and gave us a task. He also gave us a function. In Genesis 1, we read that the function of man is to rule and reign over the earth and to have dominion over it, and to be fruitful and multiply. That's the function of mankind. That's what we're supposed to do in the earth. And the purpose in mankind, then, is found in recognizing that Genesis 1 gives us a temple narrative. The series of 7 days, the 3 concentric circles, when we recognize both of those work together in temple and tabernacle imagery and in worship practices, we see that creation itself was intended to be a temple. God comes into the temple, and as the temple is set up, what did people do when they inaugurated the temple? They would bring the image of the God into the temple, and they would go through a practice imbuing the idol, the image, with life. Well, who is God's image that he brought into his temple? Man. And what does he do? He gives man life, breathing into our nostrils the breath of life. And he gives us a purpose. In Genesis 2, we read the purpose of man was to work and to serve, or guard. To work and to guard. 2 Hebrew words, aved and shamar. Aved is the word you'll find anytime you read of work or service in the Bible, in the Tanakh. Guard, shamar, it's a military term. Imagine the guy standing at the gate with the spear, making sure that nobody who is unauthorized passes. And if they do pass, they are going to use lethal force. That's what man was tasked to do. And if we examine the Bible, the Tanakh, from one end to the other, we'll find that those 2 words only ever occur together in Genesis 2 and in the book of Numbers in 2 different places. And in those 2 different places in the book of Numbers, they're both in connection with the Levites' role in the tabernacle. And that shows us that man was set up to be priests, to be Levites in God's temple, the earth. That was the purpose of humanity. Our function was to rule and to reign as kings. Our purpose was to be priests to our God. And so when we see that God will make us a kingdom of priests, or kings and priests, what is he telling us? He's going to give us back our function and our purpose when we come into covenant with him. So as we go through the Bible, we then recognize that there was a conflict. In that conflict, mankind took those 3 things, the source, and we made ourselves the source. Who determines good and evil? Well, we determine good and evil. We're the source of morality. We're the source of life. We're the source of all that is good. What is the function of mankind? Well, the function of mankind was to rule over the beasts. But in the garden, at the tree, the beasts ruled over the man. And the function was perverted. No longer did we fulfill our function. We allowed the function to overcome us. And we lost our function. No longer being the ones ruling and reigning. Instead, now we are subject to the beast nature, if you will, as the Bible describes it as you go into it. And what was the purpose of mankind? To be priests. And what did man fail to do in the garden? We failed in our duty to guard the garden, to guard God's commands, the role of a priest. In the garden, mankind failed to do the things that God had given man to do. And in so doing, all of creation was corrupted. And the conflict of history was born. And the Bible addresses that conflict from one end to the other. And as we talked about yesterday, the way that it addresses the conflict, the story beats that occur to progress the conflict into a resolution that will come one day, is found in the festivals. But it's also found in covenant. Throughout the Bible, we will find places where God enters into covenants with mankind. Well, each of those covenants actually overlaps with a festival, with a holiday. So as we go through the Bible and we see the big story beats of the Bible, as the story is thrust forward into a new realm, a new era, we find there's a feast that actually recognizes and celebrates that covenant. And so as we go through the festival cycle every year, we are living the covenants of God. The covenants that have come, Passover, Shavuot, the covenants that will come, Yom Teruah, Yom Kippur, and Sukkot. Right now, on this chart, we're waiting for the covenant of Sukkot. That new creation, that new hope of a new world that we are all longing for. When death will be defeated. When the conflict will be resolved. We read of it very clearly in the book of Revelation, in the book of Isaiah, in the book of Ezekiel, in the book of Zechariah. Throughout the prophets, we are told of this hope that God has for mankind, that he is leading mankind through. And the way that he's doing that is by entering into covenant with men. So today we're going to start actually looking at these covenants and how they progress the story. Because as we go through our yearly cycle, we're living these covenants. And so if we know more about these covenants and we can identify some of the aspects of these covenants, we can better appreciate the festivals when we go through them. Because the festivals are teaching us about these covenants. And so we need a definition for covenant. This is Merriam-Webster's definition. It's usually a formal, solemn, binding agreement or compact. That's definition 1. Or it's a written agreement or promise, usually under seal, between 2 or more parties, especially for the performance of some action. Now recognize that here in Webster's definition of covenant, there are 2 parties involved. When we come to covenants with God, there are always 2 parties involved, but there's only one party that signs on to the covenant in most cases, not in every. In most cases, it's just one party. It's God himself who does the creation of the covenant, who walks through the pieces, as it were, who puts his name and identity and even existence on the line. If this covenant doesn't come true, then I give my life to make it right. Because that's what happened in a covenant. So a covenant is a binding agreement. And we find examples of human covenants in the book of Genesis in several places. So in Genesis, we see a covenant with Jacob in Genesis 31. This covenant with Jacob, Jacob left his family. He went to Laban. He lived in Laban's house. He married his 2 daughters. He lived there 7 years, he lived there 20 years. And then he finally had enough with Laban taking advantage of him and tricking him and doing all this stuff to him. So he escapes in the middle of the night. Runs away as Laban's 3 days away. Well, 7 days later, after he escapes, Laban catches up to him on the border of Israel. And they make a covenant together. They set up some standing stones. They make an agreement. Jacob will no longer proceed past those stones to go towards Aram to bother Laban. And Laban will no longer go past those stones into Canaan to bother Jacob. And they cut this covenant. There's a 2-way binding agreement going on here. What's not mentioned in Genesis 31 is the way that the covenant was crafted, which we'll get to in just a moment. But this type of covenant has a specific way that the covenant would have been crafted in that day. For now, all we need to know is if someone broke the covenant, their life was forfeit. Covenants are that binding in the ancient Near East. If Jacob was to go past those boundary stones with his family at any point in the future, part of the covenant agreement was Jacob's God would destroy him. And if Laban was to go past those boundary stones, the covenant agreement was Laban's God would destroy him. We also see a covenant occurring between Abimelech and 2 of Jacob's forefathers. Were fathers, literally, in Jacob's case. In Genesis 21, Abraham and Abimelech. Abraham's living in the area of Gerar. Abimelech is the king of Gerar. Abraham digs some wells. Abimelech's men come and contest those wells. And so Abraham goes to Abimelech because they've had an agreement. Abraham goes to Abimelech and says, hey, look, we had this agreement that you wouldn't bother me and I wouldn't bother you. But your men came and they're contesting these wells. They're trying to take the well that I dug. And so Abimelech's, oh, yeah, sure. But I fully intend to keep my promise. My men were out of line. And so they enter into a covenant together. They create a covenant saying, if my men bother you in the future, my life is forfeit. I will make sure my men do not bother you in the future. And Abraham in the same way, I will make sure my men do not bother you. I get to dig wells, and those wells get to belong to me if I dig them. That's the agreement they made. Well, just like all mortals, Abraham passes away, but Abimelech is still alive. And Isaac comes along. Isaac then goes and digs those same wells, because after Abraham died, apparently, Abimelech's men went and filled in those wells. The covenant was over. Abraham's dead. With the death of a person, the covenant is ended. That's what Hebrews says. That's actually what happened. The covenant didn't exist anymore. And so the men filled in the wells. So Isaac now needed to make his own covenant with Abimelech. And so they go through the same process. He digs a well. Abimelech's men contest it. Isaac moves on. Digs another well. Abimelech's men come and contest it. He moves on and digs another well. The third time, when Abimelech's men come to contest it, Isaac's had enough. So he goes to Abimelech and says, look, you had this agreement with my father. Can you make the same agreement with me? Because I'm tired of digging wells. Specifically, and most likely, the same wells my father already dug and were filled in. I'm tired of redigging his wells and your men coming along and telling me they're theirs. So let's make an agreement. And they do. They make an agreement at Beersheba. Beersheba meaning the well of oaths, or the well of seven. And they sacrifice 7 sheep. It's actually really cool imagery. There's a lot of wordplay going on in that story. But they craft a covenant at Beersheba. And at that point, Isaac now has a covenant with Abimelech. But just as with the covenants of all men, once one of the men passes away, the covenant is broken and hostilities may continue. So we see human covenants being crafted in the New Testament. We see them throughout the rest of it, but these 3 are actually very easy to point out and very easy to read because they're very short. And they teach us about the covenants. Because as these men are swearing their oaths, as they're offering sacrifices, as they're cutting animals apart and walking between the pieces, they're essentially saying, if we break this covenant, you have the right to hunt me down and kill me. Or your God has the right to hunt me down and take my life. So when God enters into a covenant by himself, what's happening? Well, let's look at the covenants that we have explicitly stated in the Bible. I believe there's a covenant that's not explicitly stated. We don't read of when it was cut. But we do read that it is a covenant. We'll talk about that next week, in the next teaching. So with the Noahide covenant, we'll find throughout the Bible the covenant creation follows a series of steps. So first off, God will come to a person and he'll offer a promise to the person of the covenant. So God gives the promise of Genesis 6:17 through 18. For behold, I will bring a flood of waters upon the earth to destroy all flesh, in which is the breath of life under heaven. Everything that is on the earth shall die. But I will establish my covenant with you, and you shall come into the ark, you and your sons, your wife, and your sons' wives, and you. Now, is God creating a covenant at this point? No. He's promising, if you come into the ark, I will make my covenant with you on the other side. So what's included inherently in this promise? There's a call to action. And the call to action we actually read in verse 14. Make yourself an ark of gopher wood, make rooms in the ark, cover it inside and out with pitch. If Noah did not act in faith if he didn't have the belief that God meant what he said, Noah would not have been part of the covenant. The covenant could not have happened had Noah not taken the action based on his faith. Hebrews 11 tells us about this. It tells us about the faith of individuals. And what does the faith of these individuals in Hebrews 11 cause them to do? To take action. Faith leads to action. Well, here, God gives a promise. Because Noah believes God, he takes action. He builds the ark. Skip forward a few chapters and more than a year, actually more than 400 years to build the ark and then go through the floods and everything. Genesis 9, on the other side of the flood, 8 people alive on the earth. And God crafts a covenant with Noah. This is when he actually makes the covenant. In Genesis 9, 8 through 11, I didn't include it up here because it made everything way too small. So I'll go ahead and read it. Then God said to Noah and to his sons with him, Behold, I establish my covenant with you and with your offspring after you, and with every living creature that is with you, the birds, the livestock, and every beast of the earth with you, as many as came out of the ark. As it is for every beast of the earth. I establish my covenant with you, that never again shall all flesh be cut off by the waters of the flood, and never again shall there be a flood to destroy the earth. So God creates a unilateral covenant. But as he does so, he doesn't do it with just Noah. This covenant is being made with beasts, with animals, with birds, with every creature that was on the ark. Notice he doesn't make it with fish. Why? Because fish don't care for flood. But he makes the covenant with all of the creatures that would be affected by a flood. It's not just Noah that gets this covenant, but it also doesn't go to the full extent of creation that gets this covenant. It's only the things that might be affected by a worldwide flood, or would be affected, as has just happened through the flood waters. And with the covenant, there comes a sign. A rainbow in the sky. A sign of the promise that God will never again do as he did in the days of Noah. This covenant is a unilateral covenant. And when we understand covenants, the one who makes the covenant is putting their existence on the line if they fail to keep the covenant. So what is God doing here as he makes this unilateral covenant? He's saying, if the world floods again, I will cease to exist. Now, can God cease to exist? No. And if he did, none of us would know because we would all cease to exist. So, let's hope he doesn't break his covenant. But we know he won't because he is a God who keeps his promises. So this is the first covenant that we explicitly read of in Scripture. And I'm going to keep using the word explicitly because, as I said, I believe there's one that predates this that wasn't made with man, but was rather made with all of creation. Again, next teaching, just a little teaser for next Friday, I think it is. So that as we move forward, just a little bit in Genesis, just a couple chapters, we begin to encounter the Abraham covenant. The Abrahamic covenant, again, it follows the same pattern. A promise is given to Abraham, Genesis 12, 1 through 3. Now the Lord said to Abraham, Go from your country, a call to action, and your kindred, your father's house, and the land that I will show you, and I will make you a great nation. I will bless you and make your name great so that you will be a blessing. I will bless those who bless you, and him who destroys you I will be a curse, and in you all the families of the earth shall be blessed. We have a promise. We have a call to action. If Abraham doesn't follow through on this call to action in faith, what happens? There's no Abrahamic covenant. Because part of the Abrahamic covenant, as we're going to see if we turn forward to Genesis 15, in Genesis 15, the Abrahamic covenant includes land. Now, if we go forward to Genesis 15, and we consider what has happened to Abraham. Abraham, at this point, has been in Canaan for probably around 13 years by the time Genesis 15 happens. He's gone through a famine. He went down to Egypt. The king of Egypt took his wife. God sent plagues, let Abraham go free. He gets back to the land. Him and Lot separate. Lot gets taken captive by Chedorlaomer. Chedorlaomer takes him to the north. Abraham gathers his 318 men and some of his buddies, and they all go off and fight Chedorlaomer. They win against 5 armies, rescue Lot, and Abraham offers an offering to Melchizedek, a tithe of the spoils to Melchizedek. Actually, a tithe of what he owns. He doesn't take any spoils. He offers a tithe of what he owns to the priest Melchizedek. That brings us to Genesis 15. Now, as we get to Genesis 15, we read something interesting. Genesis 15, verses 2 and 3. God comes to Abraham and he says, I will be your shield and your protector. And Abraham responds with doubt. Abraham responds with, but Lord, what will you give me? For I continue to be childless, and the heir of my house is Eliezer, my servant, a guy from Damascus that I hired. And Abraham said, behold, you have given me no offspring, and a member of my household will be my heir. 13 years after this promise was given, I will make you a great nation. I will bless the earth through you. Just do what I say. Abraham's like, where is it? I don't see it happening. I just went and fought a war. I could have died in that war, and your promise would have failed had I died in that war. His own mortality is weighing on him in this moment, I believe. And in that, he begins to doubt. God, are you sure with your promise? Did you really mean what you said? And God responds to this, I will make your offspring as the stars of the sky. Look up, count them if you can. That's what your offspring is going to be. And Abraham believed. He believed once again, and that was counted to him as righteousness. And then God asked him to do something we find a little bit weird. God asked Abraham to get together a few animals and to cut them in half, or get a few animals, and we're not really told what Abraham was supposed to do with them, but Abraham understood because he understood covenants. The animals that are being asked for, he knows what is meant by this. And so we need to take a moment and pause and actually talk about how covenants were cut in the ancient Near East. Now, this isn't every form of covenant. Marriage covenants did not conform to this way of cutting a covenant. But other agreements that were very serious would happen in this way. So the two parties would get together. They would haggle it out. They'd come to some terms that benefited both, but would also harm both a little bit of compromise in order to come to an agreement between these two parties. As they come to an agreement, finally they'd say, all right, we're ready to cut this covenant. So they would gather these animals, they would cut them in half down the middle, and put them on either side of a walkway. They would create a path between the pieces of these animals. And that's what Abraham did. He cut the animals in half and laid them out so that there was a walkway between the animals. Guess what's on the ground between these animals? Blood, gore, guts, just all the nasty dick. The two parties would then walk between the pieces together. In the blood. They would walk between the pieces together, and then when they got to the other side, they would swear by the terms of the covenant. Now, in their swearing of the terms of the covenant, they would take the name of their God, and they would agree, sometimes explicitly, other times not so much, it's just implied. They would agree, should I break the covenant, and what happened to these animals that I just walked through, may that happen to me. If I break this covenant, that's what I am signing up for. It's that serious. Covenants in the ancient Near East were no joke. So that's what's happening. When Abraham takes these animals, Genesis 15, 17 through 20, cuts them in half, he puts them down, and he's expecting to walk through the animals. He beats off the birds, get away, stay away, we're trying to do this. God's going to show up. We're going to cut this covenant. But then God puts him to sleep. And the sun had gone down, and it was dark. Behold, a smoking fire pot, and a flaming torch passed between these pieces. And on that day the Lord made a covenant with Abram, saying, to your offspring I give this land from the river of Egypt to the great river, the river Euphrates, the land of the Kenites, the Kenizzites, the Cadmonites, the Hittites, the Perizzites, the Rephaim, the Amorites, the Canaanites, the Girgashites, and the Jebusites. Where's Abraham in this? Sleeping in a vision. He doesn't walk through the pieces. Again, it's a unilateral covenant. God is saying, I'm giving your people this land, and if it doesn't happen, I'm putting my existence on the line. It's that significant. That's how real Israel being in the land is. If they do not get into the land at some point in history and own it all, God will cease to exist according to his covenant. That's why it's important that we hope and pray that Israel truly does get into the land. And we're told that it will happen. In Ezekiel 40 through 46, we're told of the temple. And the latter parts of that, we're told of Israel coming back to the land as a full people. The northern tribes, the southern tribes, all of the strangers that have joined themselves to Israel, everybody who worships God coming into the land of Israel and being set up as a nation according to these boundaries. Something that hasn't happened yet, but will happen in the future.
Does that include the land of Lebanon?
So the question is, does Abraham's descendants mean only Jacob, or does it also include Ishmael and Esau? If it includes Ishmael and Esau, then the lands of Lebanon, Jordan, those areas are already inhabited by Abraham's descendants through the non-covenant people. If it means only descendants of Jacob, then yes, it will mean Lebanon, it will mean Jordan, it will mean significant portions of Saudi Arabia, so on and so forth.
Zechariah 10:10.
Yeah. But notice this is, and hone in on this, please. This is a unilateral covenant. God is putting his own existence on the line in this covenant. It is that serious. So if we move forward a few hundred years, God fulfills this covenant. And how does he begin to fulfill this covenant? Well, he does what he says. 400 years later, he brings Abraham's descendants out of slavery, brings them to himself, carries them through the wilderness, and brings them to his mountain, Mount Sinai. And on Mount Sinai, as we open this chapter, as we open Exodus 19, we'll begin to see that God does what? What's the first thing that happens with the covenants? He makes a promise. Exodus 19. Then there's a call to action on the people. They have to do something. The covenant is made in Exodus 24, 3 through 8. It is a two-way covenant this time, and it is conditional. So Exodus 19, 4 through 6, God gives the promise. And in that promise it says this, "You yourselves have seen what I did to the Egyptians, and how I bore you on eagle's wings and brought you to myself. Now therefore, if you will indeed obey my voice and keep my covenant, you shall be my treasured possession among all peoples, for all the earth is mine. And you shall be to me a kingdom of priests and a holy nation. These are the words that you are to speak in front of the people of Israel." So God makes a promise, but it's a conditional promise this time. If you obey my covenant, then I will make you a kingdom of priests. I will restore your purpose from the garden. If you just do what I say. Just keep my covenant. It's that simple. Well, in Exodus 24, so Moses goes up the mountain. God comes on the mountain, speaks the words of the Ten Commandments in Exodus 20. Exodus 21 through 23, then, the people say, "No, don't let him speak to us. We can't handle it. It's too much for us to bear." Instead, "Moses, you go talk to God and you tell us." The people appoint Moses as a mediator of the covenant between themselves and God. So Moses, as the mediator, goes to God and gets 3 more chapters of covenant. Chapters 21 through 23. This covenant is a marriage covenant. If you read these chapters and you know anything about a Hebrew wedding ceremony, you'll notice that there are so many different references to a Hebrew wedding ceremony wrapped throughout this chapter. And for millennia, as I said yesterday, Jews have seen the Sinai covenant as a wedding covenant. And it's treated that way throughout the Bible. Ezekiel 16, I brought you to myself and made you my bride. Jeremiah 4, you did not obey, and so I have divorced the northern tribe of Israel. And if you don't obey, you'll be divorced too. But should you repent, then you can come back. Hosea, take for yourself Gomer and make her your bride. This is a sign of how you have treated me as a husband to a wife. Right there. So as we continue through and we get to Exodus 24, it returns back to narrative. So we have 4 chapters of rules, of law. Then we get to Exodus 24. And in Exodus 24, it returns back to narrative. And this is where we find the covenant actually being cut. Moses came and told the people all the words of the Lord and all the rules, and all the people answered with one voice and said, all the words that the Lord has spoken we will do. And Moses wrote down the words of the Lord, and he rose early in the morning and built an altar at the foot of the mountain and 12 pillars according to the 12 tribes of Israel. Remember that? When Jacob and Laban made a covenant, what did they do? They created a pillar and a mound as witnesses. Right? One representing Laban, one representing Jacob, as a witness to this covenant that they're making. Well, Moses builds 12 pillars now, representing the 12 tribes of Israel, to act as a sort of witness to this covenant. And he sent young men of the people of Israel who offered burnt offerings and sacrificed peace offerings of oxen to the Lord. And Moses took half of the blood, put it in a basin, and half of the blood he threw against the altar. And he took the book of the covenant, what he'd just written on Mount Sinai, and he read it in the hearing of the people. And the people said, all that the Lord has spoken we will do, and we will be obedient. And Moses took the blood from the bull and threw it on the people. This wasn't just a light sprinkling. He took the bull and sealing the people in the blood of the covenant. And he said, behold, the blood of the covenant that the Lord has made with you in accordance with all this word. Threw the blood on the people, and that blood sealed them and covered them and brought them into that covenant. I don't want to be crass, but in a marriage, a very similar thing happens if the woman's a virgin. There is blood that's part of the forming of the covenant. It's just how God made it. And when they went through this covenant of marriage, God covered the people with blood as bringing them into the covenant. And what is being said through this? This is now a two-way covenant. Mankind now has a responsibility in part of this covenant. God's not the only one who's carrying the Sinai covenant. Mankind has to meet him halfway. There is an if-then statement in Genesis 19, and we have to recognize that. This covenant is based on conditions. Conditions that mankind have to do. But mankind being mankind, what does mankind do? Not even 40 days, and the covenant is broken. Exodus 32. While Moses is still on Mount Sinai, Israel's on the ground, breaking the covenant that they just said, all that the Lord has said we will do and obey. Asa and Shema. We will do it and we will obey it. And then, Moses has gone a little long. I guess we won't be doing this and obeying this anymore. Our mediator, he's gone, so we need a new mediator. Let's make a calf. We'll make this golden calf our mediator. Because in idolatry, that's what this idol serves as. It is the mediator between the man and the God. They're not actually worshiping the idol as though it were a god. They're imagining that the god comes and inhabits the calf, and the idol somehow acts as the mediator. The people aren't trying to replace God with the calf. They're trying to replace Moses with the calf. And they point to this calf and they said, "Behold, our gods who's brought us out of Egypt," because Moses is now the visible sign of God to them. But he's gone. So we need something new to look at, because we got to look at something. We can't just have God not be here and worship him. We got to see him with our eyes. So they make this calf. But with the broken covenant, what does God threaten? Exodus 32, 7 through 10. And the Lord said to Moses, "Go down, for your people whom you brought up out of the land of Egypt have corrupted themselves. They have turned aside quickly out of the way that I commanded them. They have made for themselves a golden calf and have worshipped it and sacrificed to it and said, 'These are your gods, O Israel, who brought you out of the land of Egypt.' And the Lord said to Moses, 'I have seen this people, and behold, it is a stiff-necked people. Now, therefore, let me alone, that my wrath may burn hot against them, and I may consume them, in order that I make you a great nation.'" Was God being facetious here? Was the covenant broken? What happens when you break covenant? Death. The God who oversees the covenant is now rightfully to hunt you down and judge you and kill you. That's how serious the covenant is. God's not being facetious here. He is fully within his rights to hunt down Israel, to kill every last member that participated in it, even tacitly by allowing it to happen. The only ones who weren't involved in any way was Moses and his servant Joshua, who were on the mountain. And God can still be faithful to his covenant to Abraham through Moses, even if he wipes out Israel. It's a legitimate option. But there's a mediator. There's a mediator who represents the people before God. And he understands in what God says, "Go down from this mountain, and I'm going to judge them." He understands there's this option of, no, I'm going to stay and fight for these people. I'm going to stand in the gap. I'm going to plead on their behalf. I'm going to make my case, and then you can judge. And so Moses makes his case. And what's the case he makes? Is it, no, but the people, they're fine. The people are okay. They'll get it eventually. Is that the case that Moses makes? No. What case does he make? It's for your name's sake you shouldn't destroy these people. If you destroy these people now, everyone around you is going to look in on this. All you did in Egypt, they're going to say, all of that, the whole purpose of what God did in Egypt, destroying the nation of Egypt, was in order to bring this people out into the wilderness so he could destroy them himself, rather than letting Egypt destroy them. And if you do this, they're all going to not believe anything you say in the future. Even if you do end up making me into a great nation, this is going to harm your reputation with the people, with the nations. And God's like, you have a point, and I see your heart. Your heart is for the people. So God allows Moses to then go back down the mountain, having agreed that he would not destroy the people. But Moses is acting in the role of a mediator. What does he do from God? He asks for mercy. God, show them mercy. I know your character. You are a God who loves. You are a God who is a God of covenant. I know you're serious, but I also know you've made promises to these people. And I also know your name means something in this earth, and you care about that as well. And as Moses comes down in his anger, in his wrath, he breaks the covenant. He breaks the tablets. Why does he break the tablets? Is he just like, oh, you guys, a temper tantrum, throwing things around, let me grab this rock, and throw Joshua off there, y'all are... No. This is the terms of the covenant. He breaks the terms of the covenant. Look what you did, people. You did this. This could have happened to you. Instead, it happened to these rocks. But there's still a price that must be paid. Those who are guilty must still pay the penalty. So he puts out a call to arms. Those who are guilty have to pay the price. The Levites respond, and they go through the camp, and they kill 3,000 of their own tribe who were involved in worshiping the golden calf. But that wasn't everybody. That was only the tribe of Levi. And so a plague breaks out. God goes ahead and holds the rest of the people who were responsible for what they did. And then Moses does something very interesting. Moses goes to God and says, we have sinned. We have sinned and transgressed your covenant. But you have made promises, and so please continue with us. Please overcome your anger with mercy. Allow us another chance. And God does. God gives Moses another chance. He gives Israel another chance. He creates a new covenant. Yes, the Old Testament has a new covenant. In Exodus 34, the covenant had been broken. It was illegitimate. It didn't exist anymore. And God says, I will craft it again with you. But it's not just a new covenant. It's a renewed covenant. Because the terms of this covenant are the exact same as the terms of the previous covenant. Nothing's changed in the covenant, other than now rather than God cutting the stones and writing it on with his finger, now it's Moses who cuts the stones and God writes it with his finger. That's really the only difference between the old covenant and the new covenant. Exodus 34:10, God says, and behold, I am making a covenant before all your people. I will do marvels, such as have not been created in all the earth in any nation. That's pretty significant because there's some pretty amazing stuff that happened in Egypt. There's some pretty amazing stuff that happened in Babel. There's some pretty amazing stuff that happened in all of the world with Noah. And God's saying, I'm going to do some new things. And what's the purpose for this? So that all the people among whom you are, they shall see that I am Adonai. And they shall see my work, and they will know that I am awesome. This thing that I will do for you. And as we continue through the rest of the Torah, we get into the book of Numbers. And in the book of Numbers, we find continued offense. People continue to break the covenant over and over and over again. But what does God do? This time, rather than holding the entire nation culpable, as he wanted to do on Mount Sinai, at one point in this, he does want to do it with Israel again. In Numbers 14, he wants to wipe them all out again. Moses makes basically the same argument, and God is, all right, you're right, all right. My justice demands they pay, but my mercy and my love and my promises and my name also mean something. And so his justice is fulfilled in bringing to destruction those people who broke the covenant. In Numbers 11, the people complain, oh, remember in Egypt, we had leeks and melons and cucumbers and all these amazing foods. Oh, wouldn't it be so great if we were back in Egypt, but all we have is this bread from heaven. Oh, God. That's it. Just this miraculous bread that shows up on our doorstep every morning. But we've had it for over a year now. Oh, it's getting so old. It's getting so old. If we could just throw, some cucumbers in there, mix it up, make a nice bread salad, throw some onions in there, make a soup or something. I don't know, matzah soup, that'd be good, right? No? Okay. Well, they're complaining, and they're comparing Egypt as better to what God has given them. And understandably makes God angry. And he holds people responsible for that. Numbers 12. In Numbers 12, we read of Miriam and Aaron complaining about Moses. Is he the only one that hears from God? He's kind of making himself a name out there. He's pretending he's the best of us, but really, come on, we all hear from God. We've all heard his voice. We're just as good as he is, right? And by the way, he's got that Ethiopian wife. And we all know Ethiopians. That's not a good match right there. He's completely abandoned our people for this other nation by making a covenant with them through marriage. And God holds Aaron and Miriam responsible. Now he relents because what does Moses do? He pleads on their behalf. Please restore. And he actually only holds Miriam responsible. Why? Because Aaron is holy. He's had the holy anointing oil put on him. He is the high priest. If he gets leprosy, the worship system's done. There's no one to take his place. He's still alive. That is like the end of the Levitical system if he gets leprosy. And so it's poured out on Miriam. Numbers 13 and 14, they send the scouts out into the land. They go, they look at the land, they say, you know what, that land's pretty awesome. Look at these grapes. Can you believe it? It's so bountiful. It's so plentiful. But there's one problem. There's some really big guys out there. And they got some really big cities and big walls, and we're not going to be able to take it. And the people believe. This promise that God had given them to bring them into the land, to defeat the nation that were there, to give them this land, they believe their eyes over the promise. They don't do like Abraham in their doubt. Abraham had that same doubt. God, I don't see how this could happen. And God said, trust me. We'll make it work. I'll make it work. Well, Israel here, they have these doubts. God, I don't see how we can make this happen. There's giant cities, there's giants, there's all these things going against us. And rather than believing in faith, they begin to react in lack of faith. They slander the land, they slander the promise, and they start saying once again, you know what? It actually was better for us in Egypt than it is here. In Egypt, at least we knew what was going to happen. We knew who was going to die, usually. But in Canaan, if we go in there, we're all going to die. So it's better if we just go. And God, again, holds them responsible. Who does he hold responsible? Well, this time, and he says, fine, I've had it. You're not going into the land. 40 years, you get to wander. Your kids can go in the land. Some of the people say, well, oh, wait. Okay. All right. If that's the way it's going to be, well, then I guess we'll go. And it's those people that get held responsible as they go into battle and are destroyed by the enemy. Number 16, then. The people have had it. They've had it with Moses. They've had it with Aaron. They've had it with this God. They're really not sure what they're doing out here. We've lost the hope of the promise. Everyone who's here today is not going to get to see this promise. Our kids get to see it, but what worth is that to us? And so they plot to replace the priesthood. They plot to replace Moses as leader. They plot to take the people, to overthrow them, and take the people back to Egypt. And what does God do? God calls, says, all right, come on up. All you guys who want to be priests, come before me. Aaron, you too. We'll see who I choose as priest. And fire comes out and consumes the 250. And Korah, the one who wants to replace Moses as leader, because he is older, he's better in the pecking order of age of the family structure. He's the one who should be the leader in the human way of things. What does he do to Korah and all those who want Korah to now lead? Opens the earth, swallows them whole. And then a plague breaks out. A plague in which, I forget the exact number, it's hundreds of thousands of people die. Which, if you think about it, what stops the plague? Aaron runs and gets a censer of incense and runs back out into the middle of where the plague is in order to stop it. If you imagine that the camp is maybe, 5 miles big? How long does it take for Aaron to run, fill the censer, get to the place of the plague? Not long at all. But in that time, hundreds of thousands of people died. 23,000? Okay. I was overestimating. But 23,000 people is still a significant number of people. That's a fast-moving plague. It's going to wipe Israel out in no time if somebody doesn't stand in the gap. And this time it's Aaron who acts as mediator. And on and on and on throughout the book of Numbers, we read these stories of Israel breaking the covenant, those who broke the covenant being held responsible, and those who are not responsible being allowed to continue on. And in this, we see God fulfill that promise that he made when he made the covenant. I'm going to do some new works among you. And I'm going to do them so that you know who I am. You know I'm awesome. You know I'm great. And you know I am to be feared. Because Israel didn't fear Adonai. And so as they break the covenant, God does new works, great miracles, great wonders, this time not on Egypt, not on Babylon, not on the Persians, not on people who are pagans, but on his own people who broke the covenant. Breaking the covenant is a very serious matter. Fortunately for us, there is a way to restore the covenant. Because all mankind have broken the covenant. We're completely incapable of keeping the covenant under our own power. It just simply cannot happen. Israel broke the covenant immediately, and we're foolish to think if we had been among them, we wouldn't have done the same thing. Raised in a certain way, brought into the covenant, and immediately we're like, well, yeah, but maybe we could do this thing that we still like to do from back there, right? I've told the story a couple times this weekend. When Rebecca and I came into Torah, we started by keeping the Sabbath. But when it came to our anniversary, guess what we did? We said, Joe's Crab Shack is amazing. And we went and got one of their big broil buckets. Crabs, crawfish, sausages, all this stuff. And guess what happened? A plague ran through our house that night. It was a very miserable anniversary, let me tell you that. Which just happens to be today. Yes, today is our 22-year anniversary, celebrating our covenant together. Regardless. When covenant is broken, God created a way to restore the covenant. And the way that he chose to do that, Old Testament, New Testament, doesn't matter, is he created there is a mediator to stand in the gap. Someone to make our case before him and to represent us to God, and then to represent God to us. In the Old Testament, it was Moses. It was a fallen man. He passed away just like the rest of the world. In the New Testament, it's Yeshua. Yeshua is our mediator. However, we have all broken the covenant. We are all liable for that transgression. And because we are liable for that transgression, we will face death as the just punishment for our failure. But there is a way to escape that eternal death that is the punishment for breaking the covenant. A restoration that can occur. It happens through the blood of Yeshua, and it happens through repentance. What is it that Moses did for the people at the base of Mount Sinai in Exodus 32 after they had broken the covenant? He went and repented. He said, God, these people have sinned, and they recognize that. They recognize their failure to do what you said. So please accept them back. Please continue to go with us. Please continue to choose us as your people. And Yeshua in the same way, when he represents us before God, what does he do? He goes before God and he says, yes, God, I know these people deserve death. Yes, Father, they are guilty of breaking your covenant. But that punishment that so rightfully belongs to them, place it on me. I will stand in the gap for them. I will bear their sins. I will face their punishment even though I did not do the crime. And I will pay with my life and my blood for those who are sorry for what they have done. Those who have repented. Those who are turning away from their works. Those who are trying their hardest to do your will. Those people, I claim those people, and they are mine. Because they're mine, put their punishment on me. It's a beautiful thing, what God has done for us. And it is a two-way covenant. Because it has a mediator. God has his role. But we have our role as well. And our role begins with repentance. Now this should be right in the forefront of our mind because we've just come from Yom Kippur. We've come from a recognition of the day of judgment. The day when we are supposed to afflict ourselves, humble ourselves, humiliate ourselves, and come before God and say, I am not worthy of surviving in your presence. Were you to enact justice now, I would be dead. But we have that mediator who stands in the gap, who has made the payment for us so that we might live. And it's in this moment, with that one little thing of saying, I confess and I'm sorry, that the conflict of history begins to set itself right. God did everything for us. He is bringing humanity back to restoration. He's bringing all of creation back to restoration. The only thing he asks from us is to recognize that we failed. That's it. Recognize we failed and swear our further allegiance to him. And with that, we can be part of the resolution. God invites us into the process of restoring reality. He sets us back and restores our purpose and our function as kings and priests to go out into the world. And as we spoke of this morning, that was echoed in the Great Commission. Go into the world, teach them what I have commanded, make them disciples. That is the Great Commission. That is the role of priests. And when we come into covenant with him, the restoration begins. Paul says we are new creation in that moment. When we come to him, when we accept his sacrifice, when we throw ourselves on his mercy and grace. We are new creation. And that means as new creation, function, our purpose, and our source has been restored. And that conflict is being resolved by God working through us. I'm not going to go any further today. We will get through the rest of the covenants. But right now we need to recognize that we have broken the covenant, just like Israel. None of us has not worshipped the golden calf at some point in our life, even after we've been saved. We've fallen on our knees before that golden calf and said, oh, save me, job. Save me, family. Save me, power. That's what brought me out of sin and death and made me worthwhile. It was something else, not God. And in that moment, we deserve death. But with repentance, we can have eternal life, and we can be part of that resolution. Not just bringing it about, but living in the resolved conflict, that new creation.